while it does seem like it's still a kid's movie, and really on a lot of levels it is, the storytelling is a little dark. And I was glad that they weren't afraid to be a little dark, because not everybody's life is all sunshine and, rainbows.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we democratize the film criticism conversation by bringing on fans and critics alike to dig into their personal connection to a current or classic release. This episode, we're going to be continuing our journey through the Harry Potter franchise. And I am honored to welcome to the show for a conversation on Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Teri Sears. Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So tell people a little bit about who you are, what you have going on, and then we'll get into all the Harry Potter stuff.
Well, who I am, I'm just mostly a fan. I have been a fan of science fiction since I was old enough to read. I think that my first book that I read all on my own as a kid was Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Robert Heinlein. I think I was in the third grade, so I got started early on science fiction.
And I think we initially met through Michael Hinman, a mutual friend who's also been on the show a couple of times. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of sci-fi connections going on behind the scenes. So what was your introduction to Harry Potter specifically?
Well, I was trying to remember that earlier today, and I'm pretty sure that I never really heard of Harry Potter until I saw the first trailer for the movie.
Okay.
For the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. And then I found out that it was books. And I have this weird thing about not wanting to read a book if I know the movie's coming out, because I spend the whole time going, well, that's not right.
Right.
That's not right. And that's not right. So if I know a movie's coming out, then I'll wait and read the book after the movies come out. And I liked the movie so much, I sat down and read the first book, and then I read the second book, and then I read the third book, and that was all that was out at the time, I believe. And but I remember going to a convention in Los Angeles, and I was in the middle of reading, I believe the second one's Chamber of Secrets. And every time that I had a break that I wasn't going to a panel, I would run back up to my room to go read the book, because I had a real paper book. And so I didn't want to carry it around with me because it was kind of heavy. But yeah, I would go up and read the book because I was that interested in it. It was probably the first set of young adult books that I had read since I was a young adult, other than rereading the Chronicles of Narnia a couple of times.
Yeah, this was, I think, the beginning of the real YA boom. After this, what years before Hunger Games and Twilight and all of that, I think this was the kind of resurgence of young adult literature in a lot of ways. And I love that you mentioned that approach as far as, the movie's coming out, I want to see the movie and then read the book, because my wife Kai, who's been on the show many times, and a lot of other people kind of take the opposite approach. They always want to read the book first and get that pure experience. But I kind of prefer the way that you said, where you see the movie, then the book just feels like an expanded version of what you've seen, as opposed to, they chopped it all up and streamlined it too much and that kind of thing. It colors your perspective on both works quite a big way, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. You feel like if you watch the movie first and then you get to read the book, you feel like the story's been fleshed out more for you. And like you said, expanded rather than shrunken down in the movie condensed version. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But I was liking it so much that I read all of the books as they came out after that. And, eventually the books got ahead of the movies coming out. So I believe that, I think it was Order of the Phoenix when that one came out, that I was in line at Barnes & Noble at 11 o'clock at night to go buy the book when it came out at midnight. So, yeah, I wound up liking them a lot.
Yeah, that's part of the reason that I'm doing the Harry Potter series this year, because last year we did the Star Wars saga, is that I feel like it is kind of this generation's Star Wars as far as a cultural phenomenon, while people remember waiting on lines for the books or the movies and anticipating each one. And the fact that they did 8 movies over a 10-year period is kind of unprecedented. I feel like outside of something like, maybe the Nightmare on Elm Street series or something like that, you've never gotten that many movies in that span of time. Definitely not with movies on this scale.
Absolutely. yeah, that was pretty amazing that they managed to get them all out when they meant to as well.
Yeah, and it's also I think the early 2000s, this franchise and the Lord of the Rings franchise kind of in tandem really helped fantasy movies break into a new, mainstream level, because this came out around the same I think the same, like the month before Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. So it's like the first two of each franchise was like back to back, because I was actually working at a movie theater. I was working at, before the call we were talking about, is AMC going to survive the coronavirus? And around this time of these movies release, I was working at AMC Veterans over here in Tampa. And yeah, these were huge. In fact, I wasn't familiar with the books either. I was working there and just like, what are all these people coming in with lightning bolts on their heads? I don't understand. What is this? And then kind of discovered it along with most other people. So where does this, before we get into this movie specifically, what are your thoughts of the franchise and the way that it evolved, and the way that J.K. Rowling kind of built upon the stories upon each other? Where does this one fit for you amongst the rest of the franchise?
I think that she did a fantastic job keeping the continuity between all of the novels, because that's really tough. After a while, when you start writing multiple novels in the same universe, it's a really easy thing to drop. What's the word I'm looking for? To drop plot threads or to mix up things that happened and say it happened one way, but the book says something else. I've seen that in a lot of series from other authors, and I don't remember seeing anything that got mixed up that way in the run of the books. There were a lot of things that you thought when you read them the first time, what the heck is this? And then when you get later into the story, you go, oh, that's what it is. And then you go back and read them again or watch the movies again, and you go, oh, I can see that now, where that was a hint that I just didn't know was a hint.
Yeah, I really wonder how much of that she had planned from the beginning and how much was kind of, picking up things that had been introduced earlier and sort of not really retconning them, because she didn't, like you said, she didn't really change anything, but just fleshing them out. I always think of in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, which is a random reference compared to this, but there's the compass that you just sort of assume that it leads to Tortuga or wherever, and then in the sequels they actually say, oh, actually it points to whatever you desire most, kind of thing. And it didn't contradict the previous movie, but it expanded on it and really kind of deepened the lore in a big way. And right. I think you see that here too, where, I mean, obviously spoilers for like a 20-year-old movie, where the diary ends up being one of the Horcruxes later at the end of the story, and the way that all kind of comes back around. I think is really kind of genius, in that you don't really, the last couple of movies, which is why it had to be split in half, everything in there is critical. I mean, in this the first couple books, I think, and movies are kind of a pair on their own, and we'll get into exactly why. But as you go on, they had to really trim a lot of the book out in order to fit it into a 2.5 hour movie, because they were so rich and so dense, and like the world building was so extensive.
Yes. And sometimes I think that was they did a good job of that. And sometimes I think they did a really bad job of that, the cutting things down and out, to squash them into 2 hours.
Yeah, I think I talked with Bree on the Sorcerer's Stone episode prior to this, like the Marauders map and some of the stuff there with the group of friends with James Potter and Sirius, and all that whole backstory was kind of fumbled in like, I think, films 3 through 5. There was no convenient place for them to drop it, I think, later on, and then just forgot about it. So that's always a little frustrating.
And also, I remember you guys talking about the fact that some of the stuff was, left out and very confusing for the people who had never read the books.
Yeah.
That if you'd only seen the movies, that you left some of that story going, I don't understand what's going on. And I think that might be the only criticism I have of the franchise in general, movie-wise, is that. Because I would go and ask a couple of my friends after one of the movies came out, saying, okay, what do you think was going on there? To see, did they get out of it what I got out of it? And most of the time the answer was no, because they hadn't read the books, and so things didn't make sense to them.
Yeah, they don't really clarify a lot of the backstory stuff with some of the supporting characters, which is unfortunate. But I think at this point in the franchise, it's before the series kind of I don't want to say upgraded because that's reductive to the first couple movies, but sort of expanded its scope and really got a lot darker and deeper. And this is still when they're kind of quasi kids movies, like, you know, dark kids movies, but still movies that are like not towing completely into the violence. Like there's no deaths even in this movie yet, aside from, I guess, Tom Riddle's memory. But, you know, I think we're like pretty much leaning right into the movie. So.
Right. Yeah. The only people that got killed were ghosts.
Pretty much. Yeah. No, everybody gets petrified, conveniently enough. Not, you know, you look in the basilisk straight in the eye and it takes you out. But that doesn't happen to everybody here. They're like for multiple different reasons. But I think now we're just leading straight into the story of the movie. So let's listen to a little bit of the trailer for Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets right now.
One year ago, he learned the truth.
You're a wizard, Harry.
And his first year at Hogwart School became legend. And so, for Harry Potter and his friends, another year begins.
Bloody bird's a menace.
Their education in the magical arts continues.
Pixies.
Laugh if you will, Mr. Finnegan. See what you make of them. No!
Old rivalries grow stronger.
Slytherin's got a new seeker.
Malfoy. You'll never catch me, Potter!
And something in the school's dark past will be awakened.
The Chamber of Secrets has indeed opened.
That was a little bit of the trailer for Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets from 2002, directed by Chris Columbus. So as we were saying, this was released just a year after Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And you can tell, I think, between the first and the second, how little the cast has changed. By the time you get to the third one, which came out, I think, like a year and a half, I think they started doing roughly a year and a half between movies after this point, just so everyone could breathe for a couple months in between. And I think you can tell because the cast looks there's a much more negligible difference between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3.
I agree. Yeah, the second movie came out in 2002 and the third one came out in 2004, but I forgot to go look which month. So it was at least a year and a half.
Yeah, I think so it was November 2001, November 2002, I think like June 2004, and then like fall 2005. It's like, I remember because my brother Freddie and I he was really big into the books and the movie. So as I was rewatching this, I was like, damn, I've seen this a lot because I remember all of this like really, really detailed, like as I was watching it, because I hadn't seen it in, I think since I introduced Kai to the franchise, like, maybe 6 years ago or something like that. So just going back and revisiting it was kind of wild. When was the last time you had seen it, I guess, until recently?
Actually, I was channel surfing around Thanksgiving or Christmas, and it was playing on like Freeform or something, and wound up catching it there.
Okay. Yeah, I think
Before that had probably been, 5 or 6 years at least. Right,
exactly. So this one also has, like I said, Chris Columbus directing. And I think his style works really well for these first two because there's a certain warmth and sort of sense of wonder to both of these stories. Do you think that his style fits the second one as well as it does the first one, or would you have preferred to see a different filmmaker come in at this point?
I think that having the continuity in directors between the first and the second movie was a really good idea because that you still got to see the characters and the storytelling in the format that you had become accustomed to in The Sorcerer's Stone. I think that if they had changed directors between 1 and 2, that might have been a little bit too jarring, especially with the movies only being a year apart from each other. Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think you might have needed that early on too, because the first one sets the tone and the second one the first one introduces everything, really, is what it is. And the second one, it kind of gets you a little bit deeper into the world, and it gets the audience, I think, a little more comfortable and accustomed to what the tone of the series is going to be going forward. And then from that point, I think, it just all bets are off. 3 and 4 are different directors, and then 5 is when David Yates just takes over until the end. Where does this one actually rank for you within the franchise? Oh, wow. Hadn't really thought of that. I don't know. I liked them all for various reasons.
Yeah.
I never had any that was least my favorite, except perhaps the Half-Blood Prince. That might be my least favorite of them all, but it's hard to say.
That's fair. That's fair. I do think, and this is my main criticism, because I do like this movie. I like all of them really, but none of them are bad in my book. I think that this one suffers in a little bit because I think in here it feels like you can feel the length in this movie. At least I did a little bit. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it doesn't need to be. It's one of the shortest books, and I think the problem here is, and I think this is why Columbus is good for the reason that I just mentioned here, but I think it's good that they shifted off of him for the next one, because I think they could have slipped into sort of a sense of complacency. I do, because I feel like the story and the script in this movie, which is weird because the same screenwriter wrote all of them except for 5, is very slavish to the material. Like you can almost feel the chapter breaks in the movie itself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes, I do. And every time I have watched this movie, except for the time I saw it in the theater, I always get that same feeling that you were mentioning about this is just a little bit too long. Because by the time you get to the scene at the end where Harry's fighting the basilisk, I'm like, okay, is it over yet?
Exactly. Like, because I clocked it. I think it takes roughly 45 minutes for the Harry to stumble upon the Chamber of Secrets has been opened, the blood on the wall, and the conversation with McGonagall explaining what the Chamber of Secrets is. That shouldn't be 45 minutes into the movie. That should be like maybe 30 minutes in. Like I feel like they could have trimmed 10 to 15 minutes of setup of like the Cornish pixies. That kind of goes nowhere. And there's like 3 or 4 scenes establishing what Lockhart's deal is. You know what I mean? I feel like it could have been streamlined a little bit more and just kind of tightened. And I think that maybe Columbus was a little bit, maybe not necessarily indulgent, just like kind of treading carefully and trying not to piss off the rabid fan base that like we were talking about earlier.
Yes. Well, the Cornish pixies scene, I understand what you mean about that. That was, it seemed superfluous.
Yeah.
But in the book, there's so many scenes that tell us that Gilderoy Lockhart is a bumbling idiot. And most of them are cut out for the movie. So you have to have at least one scene to show exactly what kind of an inept wizard that he really is.
Right.
So if you don't have the Cornish pixies scene for that, then they needed to have picked something else.
Yeah.
And the pixie scene is just funny too.
It is. So. It's fun, and that's the thing. It's like I'm not necessarily even knocking the movie. I'm knocking the movie's like structure and length as much as because taken on its own, it's a fun scene. But it don't feel like the story necessarily needs 2 hours and 40. That's almost the length of a Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah, I agree. You know, a little over 2 hours is not bad, but over 2.5 is just you got to have a reason to do that.
Right.
And I agree that there's some of the scenes that could be shorter or knocked out, but if you got to make a trade sometimes, if you knock out this one thing, you need something else. And I just think that you definitely needed some of the extra stuff to show just how horrible a wizard Gilderoy Lockhart was. Because yeah, he was an idiot.
I think that's kind of a good transition into some of the new characters because we meet several in here. As we were saying, the second one really kind of like the first one introduces the world. The second one is like, all right, you know what Hogwarts is. You've met the wizarding world. Now let's really like set the pieces on the board. You know,
right.
Is really what's happening here. So I think the first one and this character that you mentioned, Lockhart, Gilderoy Lockhart, is not prevalent in any other films. I know he shows up a couple times in the novels, just like here and there. What were your thoughts of Kenneth Branagh's performance here? And it sort of sets off the trend of every school year there's a different Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, which is one of my favorite running gags in this franchise. It's just always different reasons, but you know, it's just a cursed position.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the thing from Dinosaurs. Oh no, we need another Timmy. Yeah, I thought that Kenneth Branagh's portrayal of Gilderoy Lockhart was perfect. He was the right amount of smarmy and trying to get on your good side, and while simultaneously not understanding any of the social cues from anyone around him.
No, the way that he in the bookstore when Ron's like, "Oh, Mom fancies him," and Mrs. Weasley and all the girls, all the like young girls, are all like swooning over him.
Oh yeah.
And all the guys just like Ron's like makes his face like, "What the hell is going on?" All the guys are just like completely confounded. There's a moment later, I think it might be in the Cornish Pixies scene actually, where he makes a joke and he like does this like like giggle at his own joke, which I love. I love Bron. He lands those comedic moments. It's just so much fun to watch.
Definitely. And then all the girls are swooning at him again in that scene. And you're right, it is the Cornish Pixie scene. And all the girls are sitting at their desk going, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't get it. Yeah, so that also perfectly portrays the difference between boys and girls at that age.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
the girls started to like boys, or if you're into other girls, or kind of thing. Girls seem to like other people. We'll just put it that way. Right. By that age, and the boys are still generally confused and they don't understand. So
no, and you get the general vibe that all the women are just kind of Mrs. Weasley and the younger women are kind of fawning on Lockhart, but you still get the understanding that all the wizards in the school know that he's full of shit basically because McGonagall is like, oh, we'll let you take care of it. After all, your skills are legend. You could kind of be like, all right, put your money where your mouth is, Lockhart. And I love that too.
I do too. I made a note that even Snape was like, had his number, because he's like, weren't you just saying last night about how you knew who was responsible?
Yeah. He's like, really fun in this. I'm sorry that we never got a chance to see him again in the films. I was always hoping he would pop up for a cameo here or there.
Yeah, that would have been fun.
So obviously Lockhart, who his memory wiped by the end of the movie, which sets up Lupin for the next one. Dobby is actually the first new character we meet. So this was again right around the time of a month before Gollum is introduced in Two Towers. A couple years after Jar Jar Binks. Again, this is like right when like all CG characters are sort of in its infancy, at this kind of, that technology is at its infancy. I actually think, even though it's been 18 years since this movie, actually the Dobby holds up pretty well, all things considered. He does. Like, I was surprised by that.
He still looks like he's a real person to me, that, I'm watching an actual house elf, not a CGI character.
Right. And I wonder, if they just spent more time and more care on Dobby, because the troll I mentioned on the podcast for Sorcerer's Stone, the cave troll or mountain troll or whatever it is in the first movie looks so rough, and it does not hold up at all. Right. And this is just a year later. So I wonder what that's about.
Yeah, I don't know. That maybe they learned from the first one, or maybe doing something huge like the troll was a lot harder than doing something tiny like Dobby.
Right.
I'm not that well versed in how to create CGI, so I'm not really sure about that one. But I did want to mention that I was looking at who played some of the parts in this movie, and I never realized that Toby Jones did the voice for Dobby.
Mm-hmm. I know, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I know, because I've seen Toby in plenty of things, and I always spot him, but his voice was so different that I didn't recognize that it was his voice.
Yeah, I should have looked this up. I want to see some video, because whenever I recognize a voice actor or I find out who it is, I'm like, what? I always want to see video of like them in the booth recording the dialogue, just to see what it looks like to see that voice coming out of that mouth. So I kind of want to look that up now after this, to see Toby Jones performing Dobby, if any of that's on YouTube or anything, because that would be really fun.
That too. Yeah, that's always fun. I like to see how people do that, how that performance art works.
Right.
Because it's very different than regular acting.
100%. And I think Dobby is also a good example of what I was saying earlier, that this movie does feel like it's still kind of a kid's movie, because Dobby is a little more on the kid-friendly side. He's obviously there to appeal to children, not like in his obnoxiously a way as Jar Jar Binks, but just he has sort of that kind of physical, like hitting himself with the lamp and like punishing himself, and then his voice and his look and all that. And so I think that's a little bit of what I was meaning by saying that it feels like it's sort of more tailored to younger audiences. Then later on, the next time you see Dobby, he's in it for 2 seconds and they freaking kill him off. So, I mean, it's spoilers for Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. But you know what I mean?
More often than he does in the movies. But Yeah, I do know what you mean. And I was going to add to that, which was the storytelling progresses in the format as the characters get older and the actors get older. So you're not having the same kind of storytelling in the first year as you do in, years 5 and 6, et cetera.
Right. I think it's a little bit of, as you were saying, kind of the real life analog there, because, the best sci-fi, fantasy, and horror is sort of metaphors for real life. It's sort of the wizarding coming of age, kind of like something like Buffy, which is Buffy growing from a teenage girl into a woman, and it's sort of her coming of age, battling her demons, literally, in that case. And I think it's a little bit of that kind of thing. Like, as they grow older and they get deeper into their adolescence, things get more complicated, things get darker, they have to kind of fend for themselves. I mean, Harry sees his authority figures gradually stripped away movie by movie until by the end, it's basically him against Voldemort. And I think that it's that development, that evolution is really palpable in these movies. And I agree with you. I mean, I sort of said that it's kind of a kid's movie, but it is, the storytelling is definitely a bit more sophisticated. There's definitely much darker in some respects. I mean, Ginny was in a trance writing about her own kidnapping in blood on the walls of the school, I guess. So things like that, it would be kind of spooky to, younger audiences.
Yeah. I remember reading once that JK had said that the reason that she had things get more complicated and the characters definitely get older and that things are a little bit darker as you get into the series is that she said that she wanted the characters to age with the readers. Mm-hmm. So if you started out being the same age as Harry Potter, well, you're going to be older by the time you get to the last book, just like Harry is.
Yeah, yeah.
And Hermione and everybody else, yeah.
Yeah, you watch these kids grow up, and they grow up with each other over the course of 10 years. They spent a decade making 8 movies together. So that's... I think that Emma Watson and Rupert Grint and Daniel Radcliffe has said those as much as in interviews. They're basically like they consider each other kind of siblings because they went from like 12 to 20 something together. So yeah, I think that definitely shows in the storytelling in a big way. I love Dobby. We mentioned Dobby. I think he's really fun character. And I love that he's also kind of a stealth badass at the end too. I want to make sure I throw that out there.
Yes.
Right around the same time that we were discovering Yoda was a stealth badass. We find out Dobby's a stealth badass too, the same year and everything.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask a question about the end scene. So in that same one where we find out that Dobby's sort of the badass because he's protecting Harry right after Lucius accidentally freed him, right?
Right.
And Lucius is about to utter a curse. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me, had we ever heard the killing curse uttered at that point?
Nope, I do not think so. I don't think, I remember going back to this movie and be like, he was about to say Avada Kedavra, wasn't he?
Exactly. And I thought when I was watching it that I said, I don't think we'd ever heard that before. So we only heard the beginning word of it.
Yep.
So at that point, in the movies and in the books too, if you'd only gotten to the second one, you don't know what he was about to say. So you only get that info later on, and then you come back and go, oh my gosh, Lucius was about to kill Harry.
Yeah.
And stopped him.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that detail. And I was watching it this time, I was sort of wanting to see if the subtitles on my DVD would pick that up. Did not make it pick up, didn't subtitle that at all, like the Avada part.
Okay.
Yeah, but I definitely recognized it. It's pretty clear that he's saying Avada Kedavra. And I think it's, again, in a way that this movie is able to be darker, but sort of slip it under the table about how dark it's actually trying to be.
Exactly. And I think that was a brilliant thing that they did in that respect. And again, I don't think that they would have done as good a job in this second movie if they had a different director. So I think it was a really good idea to keep the same one for both the first 2 movies. And then as the characters are getting older and the story is progressing, then it's okay to switch directors and tell the story in a little bit different way because now they're older and you can't tell the same story for a 14-year-old that you do for an 11 or 12-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. So we also get, you mentioned Lucius, and I think we get a lot more of the adults set up in this movie. Like we get Lucius Malfoy, we meet the Weasleys, the Weasley parents.
Right.
I mean, I think we met Julie Walters for 2 seconds in Sorcerer's Stone at the platform, I believe.
Right.
But yeah, you get a little. You see about the Ministry of Magic. You meet Cornelius Fudge. There's a lot more of this is the infrastructure of the wizarding world in this movie. So how do you think that unfolds? And what did you think about them kind of setting that up for obviously down the line, greater stories to be told?
I did like that. I also noticed that we did get a glimpse of Hermione's Muggle parents as well. Mm-hmm. So that you get to see that, yes, indeed, all the children have parents, we get to meet some of them. And sometimes you get to see, that is why the child is like that. In the case of, where you go, that apple didn't fall far from that tree.
Right.
And, yeah.
Yeah. Jason Isaacs is so great in this movie too. Just kind of chewing up the scenery.
Perfect. Yes. He's really good at chewing scenery. Yeah. And he's definitely good at that. I don't know if you've ever seen Star Trek Discovery.
I have not.
Oh, okay. So he spends the first season of Star Trek Discovery chewing up scenery there too. So
nice.
Yeah. And it was really funny. We were watching, I had some friends over when Star Trek Discovery first came out. We were watching it. And one of my friends said, about Jason Isaacs' character, he looks really familiar. And where have I seen him before? And we're like, Lucius Malfoy? She said, no. Without IMDb and prove it to her.
Nice.
She did not believe it was the same actor. He looks so different. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. No, just in the bookstore, like his intro, it's just it's immediately has that chilling vibe that we thought Snape was giving off in the first one, whereas Snape is obviously a way more morally gray than he is like pitch black. Right. At least throughout the series until the question is, well, how black is Snape? Like how dark is he? Lucius is like, I wrote down in my notes, he's a shade master because he tears down the Weasleys and Hermione's parents and he slips the book into Jenny's cauldron. Bucket, the cauldron there. Yeah. Yeah.
And all while, giving side eye to Draco,
Yeah.
So, watching him, see where he's going. Absolutely.
I actually think one of the more interesting characters in retrospect of this series is Draco Malfoy because he starts off as sort of like, the stereotypical like mean kid that would be in like every high school movie ever made. She's like, oh, you'll see, you'll get what's coming to you. Wait till the big game or whatever. And then obviously literally in here we get the two of them facing off on the Quidditch court. And, their rivalry sort of translates into that part of the school as well. But just kind of how we see him develop over the course of this franchise from the first one to the here where their rivalry is sort of still building, getting a little more understanding of how his father is, like you were saying, how he got to be the way he is. And then how his relationship with Harry sort of turns towards the end, like we were saying about Half-Blood Prince, and how he actually becomes more of a victim than anything else later on. Yes, and I always got the feeling by the end that Harry and Draco were at least friendly to each other, and they were no rivals. And Draco kind of understood that he didn't want to be on the dark side of things. Yeah. Dad was. Yeah. He didn't want to take after his dad in that regard. Yeah, exactly. And in speaking to chewing scenery, Tom Felton just leans into that Potter, like every single time. He says, every time he addresses Harry, he says his last name, like with that same sort of venomous grimace. Literally spitting it out. Yeah, exactly. So you get a lot more of him. I really like Malfoy, as I said, in this. The little subtle things, like in the bookstore, reading something in a spell book and like ripping the page out and putting it in his pocket, or in the infirmary after the Quidditch match, and Madame Pomfrey is like, "Oh, Mr. Malfoy, you're free to go." He's just whining for no reason. Put your belly and get out of here. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And Harry, meanwhile, has no arm, and he's just like chilling, hanging out there, sitting up normal. It's so great. Like it's that sort of like privilege that he has being raised by Lucius, who's just like, oh, pure bloods, we're so much better than everybody. And again, to the real life analog, that's kind of how people that are raised to be, white supremacists or whatever, that's how they view things, and that's normal to them. And I think it's interesting to see that kind of perspective with, Malfoy calling Hermione a mudblood and all of that. I think it's again, to the point of the movie being darker. I think that's one example in which it's sort of leaning in that direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then later on in the other books, we get to meet Draco's mom, Narcissa, which her name tells you everything you need to know about her.
Yeah, not subtle with the symbolism there, Rowling.
Yeah, not at all. Exactly, about as subtle as a dump truck.
Yeah, the little relationship things that I love all that, like Ron jumping to Hermione's defense, Ginny jumping to Harry's defense. You're like, oh, those are your future couples right there.
Yeah, you don't really know that at the time.
No, you don't. Exactly.
Spend time thinking, well, Harry and Hermione will probably wind up together, and
Yeah, I like that, and then it's cute because it builds over the course of the franchise. I think it might be the next one where like Hermione gets scared about something and like jumps and like grabs Ron's hand, like little things like that. You're like, aw.
Yes, exactly.
I love all that.
That's a lot of goes back to the things that I was talking about, where the characters are just build correctly through all of the novels and through all of the movies. And that's a lot of little things that you've got to remember to tie together when you're writing that kind of stuff.
For sure. Absolutely. We also meet Moaning Myrtle,
Right.
Shirley Henderson, who now I don't know if you even know this, but who did the voice of Babu Frick in The Rise of Skywalker and has appeared in other things. She's one of those like everywhere type actresses, which I think is really interesting. So she's really fun in this as well, and adds new dimension. And I was watching the movie trying to pinpoint scenes that didn't really have any, contributing, didn't really contribute anything to the story. But Moaning Myrtle really does fit in this story like a glove. I mean, she is kind of the whole point of the movie, as it turns out later on.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I had written down a note about Shirley playing Babu Frick.
No, see?
And I remember, although I had gotten her mixed up with somebody else, with a different actress, which doesn't really matter, but I'd gone to look her up because I was trying to remember something about her. When she did that movie, she's playing a high school kid, right? She was 37.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, she really looks like she would have been in high school. So she's just blessed with having a young face.
Yeah, I think it's the pigtails too, and the glasses, and maybe the glowing. They're able to sort of make her look a little younger because she's a ghost. I don't know. There's a lot going on there, but it's a really fun performance. Over the top, but in like the best way.
Oh yeah. I mean, she needed to be. Yeah, and all the giggling and throwing things through her. I thought that was funny too.
Yeah, I love her in that.
Your first time through everything, whether it's the novels or the books, you're always convinced that Snape is just out to get Harry, and he doesn't like him, and he's just evil. And like you were saying about Malfoy, he's just black, right? But then you find out that no, really, he's gray. And, when you get to the end and like you said, spoilers, you find out that all this time that he's been protecting Harry as best as he could. When you go back and rewatch or reread those scenes, you get a different view of them, because the first time around, you're like, oh, really? He just hates Harry. And then you go, oh, no, I see where he's trying to take care of him and he's trying to watch out for him.
Yeah, no, and you also, when it's revealed that he hated James Potter and loved Lily, I think you could see a lot of how he's like, yeah, if anything really threatens Harry's life, I will step up and defend him because that's Lily's son. But at the same time, if I could perpetuate a little rivalry and make life a little shitty for Harry Potter, that'll be kind of fine.
Exactly. Yeah. He's never all good and he's never all bad. And when it came right down to it, Snape did the right thing. And I just love the way Alan Rickman portrayed him, because that was how I had Snape pictured in my head when I was reading the books anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I'll get to that, later in this podcast series, talking about the last one. But I do think that final flashback sequence of his memories is probably one of the best sequences in the entire franchise, just because it's encapsulated. Like in one instance, like you were saying, that character's completely recontextualizes everything you've ever seen him do, and I love that about Snape, and he's obviously one of the fan favorites for that reason, because he is so multi-layered. Yes,
that's a good word for it, multi-layered. And you're right. It's just, you go from not knowing to knowing and going, wow. And it's just brilliant writing and brilliant acting, both.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. And the other thing I think you notice in these first couple movies, and you get the whole Chris Columbus warmth, is the way the movie starts with the soaring music. And actually, I really like that moment where Ron rescues Harry, and there's like the music builds up, and he's like, by the way, Harry, happy birthday. You get that like Chris Columbus, like, aw, kind of thing that early in the movie, and then closes out with literally everyone in the Great Hall like tearing up over Hagrid. And I think that's the kind of thing that you only get really in the first two movies, that like sort of like warm blanket of a Harry Potter movie. I think that kind of ends here because things get so much more intense going forward.
Yes, that's a good observation. I like that warm blanket. You feel like all snuggly warm at the end.
Yeah.
And then some of the other ones are like,
that guy has no nose.
Yeah. Oops.
No, I love all that stuff. Also, in the first act of the movie, and this is a criticism that I'm going to transition into a moment of praise, but the first act of the movie, you do have a real feeling of, and this is why I think that after Columbus they needed someone else. You do get sort of a sense of, oh, here we go again, back to Diagon Alley, and back to, Hermione does the Oculus Reparo again. It's a lot of very blatant callbacks to be like, remember last time? We're doing it again, and I think that that's allowable in this one case, but I don't know. I'm almost curious how Chris Columbus would have done it, like how he would have approached the third one. If he would have kind of changed up his own style a little bit to fit the darker elements of that story.
Like you were saying earlier, that he seemed very committed to following the book to the letter, wherever he did. And the second book opens up the same way the second movie does, right, with Harry back at Privet Drive and, and the trip to Diagon Alley and Hermione fixing his glasses and all that's, very much the here we go again version of the book. And then after that, the books also change. They don't open up the same way. Yeah,
I think some of the books still have him with his family, the Dursleys and stuff, but not it's also like, in a way, because Chris Columbus did these two, it feels like this is like a marker for this segment of the Harry Potter story, because you have Chris Columbus directing both. You have, I think this is almost the last time we get like a real like full Quidditch sequence. There's a little bit in the third one in the rain, but it's kind of cut short, and then from then on it's like Triwizard tournaments and they're like battles, and it's less about like the kind of the everyday stuff happening in school. I don't think house points are really ever mentioned again after this movie. And then obviously this is not due to anything, but just life itself. This is the last performance we have with Richard Harris as Dumbledore as well. So, I mean, it feels like in a way these two movies are of their own piece in a way that the other films feel slightly different in a lot of different respects. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good observation as well about Richard Harris. I wonder what having Chris Columbus directing Michael Gambon would have been like. Yeah. Whereas, you had to change out the Dumbledore actor and the director was different. I wonder what it would have been like. And Michael Gambon's take on that character is pretty different from Richard Harris. I mean, Richard Harris plays him very regal and very straight, and he's got sort of a whimsy to him. But Michael Gambon is a little more, leans into that a lot more heavily, I think. And so I don't know if that's necessarily the director or just I think it's better than if they had Michael Gambon doing a Richard Harris impression. So I think that it's good that they gave him a little bit of his own spin. And even Dumbledore, we learn a little bit more about in this movie. We see his office finally, which is super cool. I want an office like that. With and Fawkes the Phoenix, who plays heavily into it. So I like that it's sort of peeling the layers back on the adult world as Harry is starting to discover more and more of it. And to the point of the coming of age stuff, I think it's also, you see not only in this movie, but throughout the series, Dobby says, I had to for Harry Potter's own good. Like everybody in these movies, especially early ones, is everybody's doing everything to look out for Harry. It's for your own good. It's for your own good. It's like until you get older and then you're able to decide, well, this is, decide, make those decisions for yourself. It's interesting how that's, Harry's sort of gradually taking steps out of out of his childhood and entering the adult world, like bit by bit, and having those layers peeled back.
Right. And like you had said earlier, by the time you get to the end of it, and he's sort of, for various reasons along the way, cast aside all of his mentors, and he has to face the ultimate evil on his own, which is sort of a metaphor for, now you're an adult and you have to go face the world on your own, and you don't have all these other people to look out for you and always tell you what to do. You've got to go and do it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. We were talking about how the who expands the world. I wanted to make sure we mentioned Nocturnally, which I think shows up later, like 6 or something. Nocturnally has something to do later. I remember there's a shop. I think it's the shop where Malfoy gets that like box or something from the 6th one. I haven't rewatched them in a while, so it's going to be interesting for me to go back and revisit that. The flu powder for the first time we see here. Parseltongue is sort of expanded on, which again was brilliantly set up in the first one. Harry even mentions that. Well, what did you think of the way that they sort of seeded the Parseltongue thing in throughout? The fact that Harry's hearing voices and Hermione's like, well, it's not even in Wizarding World, that's not a good sign. And then kind of that ultimate reveal that it's a giant snake.
Yeah, I thought the first time that Harry is hearing the voices and then Hermione says that to him, I thought, how must that have been to be Harry at that point and wonder whether or not you're going insane. Mm-hmm. You think you're legitimately hearing voices and then someone else tells you, no, you're not. Okay. Am I really hearing what I'm hearing, and why don't other people hear it? Or is there something wrong with me?
Yeah, exactly. And then it kind of dovetails into the beginning of him starting to doubt himself with the Parseltongue, but also the fact that he was almost put in Slytherin, the fact that he has all these commonalities with Voldemort. It develops later on where he's like, what, is there something wrong with me? What if I go bad? Because he's got the darkness within himself. And I love that whole idea. Whenever you have two characters, the hero and the villain, and they're like opposite sides of the same coin, whether they're related by blood, like Luke and Darth Vader, or whether they're just kind of like a systematic response to from one to the other, like the Joker reacting to Batman, or Agent Smith reacting to Neo. I love that dynamic between ultimate good and ultimate evil, and it's sort of that dichotomy that they can't exist without the other. You see that even in the first one, where it's the Harry's wand has the phoenix feather. The only other one's brother is in Voldemort's wand, and I love that kind of stuff.
I do too. That makes things very interesting because you wind up getting things that are on multiple levels. It's not just a very clear, this half of the world is white and that half of the world is black. And, that most of the world's the gray in the middle. Right.
And then Dumbledore tells Harry later on that it's, the hat responded to his choices, that it's the choices is what make him different from Voldemort and all that, which I think is not only just really cool mythic storytelling, but it's also like kind of a great message for kids, being like, even if you feel this way, it's depending on the way you act on things, and it's the choices. It's to quote Batman Begins, it's like it's not who I am underneath, it's what I do that defines me, that kind of thing. And I love that. I love that element of the storytelling and then the messaging as far as kind of discovering who you are and all your own inner complexity as you develop, kind of the Inside Out thing from Pixar, where it's like, oh, she's got a much more complicated board now, Riley, because, you get older and you have much more complicated feelings and you react to things differently. And I think Harry Potter franchise handles that so well.
Definitely. And I also liked that Dumbledore helped Harry understand that Gryffindor was where he belonged instead of Slytherin, because of the Sorting Hat had given him a choice.
Yeah.
Because he had said, well, the only way you got that sword from Godric Gryffindor is that you were basically worthy to have it.
Exactly. It's a little bit of like kind of an Excalibur sort of thing, too.
Exactly. That was kind of what I thought of as, well, that it was very reminiscent of King Arthur and being worthy of Excalibur or Thor and the hammer.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see here. What else? You learn about the origin of Hogwarts with the 4 wizards, which I love. And I think it's cool that in addition to all of these, at least the first few movies especially, they have like a real like Hardy Boys, like Nancy Drew style, like mystery solving but it's kind of I think this franchise doesn't get enough credit for being such a genre mashup of fantasy, coming of age, and then like kids solving a mystery. Like it's almost Scooby-Doo in some ways. And then in this movie, particularly with the basilisk and the voices and the blood written on the wall, it's really kind of almost like a slasher movie for kids, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. And you're right. I hadn't thought about it, that it was a little Scooby-Doo-ish, but that's actually, what they're doing. They are off solving mysteries and getting into trouble. And no, I didn't do it. And now I've got to go prove I didn't do it.
Would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for these darn kids.
Exactly. Oh, darn.
Let's see. Robbie Coltrane, still really, we mentioned him earlier, Hagrid, who unfortunately kind of fades away a little bit as the story goes on. You see less and less of Hagrid, which I think is unfortunate, but it's again kind of owing to the fact that he's sort of their like surrogate uncle in a way, like kind of throughout the early installments, and then his necessity as far as kind of providing information and stuff to them kind of just dissipates just naturally as they get older. So I think he's still kind of the heart of these first two movies in a lot of ways.
They don't need Hagrid to explain everything to them like they did in the beginning. As they get older, they need him less, and he's got other things to do. And you imagine that at some point, maybe he's actually mentoring some of the other first years that have come along, and we just don't see that because it's happening off page or off screen.
Right. Here he's actually even more relevant to the plot, too, because of the Chamber of Secrets being opened 50 years earlier, and Hagrid was accused and all that other stuff, which I think is great. And that transitions into the Aragog sequence, which, as fun as it is, I feel like one kind of criticism I have I think the kids in this movie are much better overall, especially Emma Watson. But I think Rupert Grint, like this is Ron at his most like scaredy cat, like his most like squeaky voice, which I think is slightly overdone in places. Again, where I think you feel like elements of the fact that they're trying to make this movie as accessible to children as possible.
Yes, and I understand his being scared of spiders. I'm not really fond of them, but I have a friend who would be the Rupert Grint character. Definitely would be Ron, or worse than Ron. And I think that if I was going to cut any part of the Chamber of Secrets out, I think I would have definitely made the Aragog sequence a little shorter, because that just a little bit too long for me. I get it that the spiders are coming from them, and I thought that was awesome that the car came to save them.
Yeah.
But they could have just stopped at the car came to save them. They got in it and they drove away.
Right. You didn't need to like the chase through the forest. I did love the sequence with the car towards the beginning. Like I always remember that a lot as a really fun scene. Just, it's one of it's standard, not standard, but it's kind of a classic, family fantasy adventure type thing with the flying car. Just having these kids fly the car and it has the cloaking device. And then there's the whole, well, it's not even cloaking device, it's a spell, I guess. But there's the whole scene where Harry almost falls off and they're hanging over the train. It's just like it's really fun scene. And I think one of the highlights as far as the big sequences are concerned.
Definitely. It reminds me a little of the flying car aspect of the flying car from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think they're definitely going for some of that.
Yeah, and I always thought that J.K. had pulled in a lot of things that she probably watched as a kid and really liked when she was writing it, making references to things, whether, she didn't say, oh, well, this is a reference to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but obviously, or at least to me, it seems like it definitely is. Mm-hmm. Like little bits and pieces of other things that if you say, oh, well, this is similar to that and that's similar. But that's always fun because then that makes things relatable. When you're reading or watching something that you can say, oh, I know what that is. I've seen it before, but this is still different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you take those inspirations from a bunch of different things and create something new. I mean, that's how that works. And it's really fun. I like that a lot. The flying car thing. I love we said the world building, but like how the magic, the spells, the characters, like everything sort of, you hear spells used in this movie that from the first one, and then as you were saying with Avada Kedavra, you kind of get like a hint of that in this, and then you don't really see it pan out until I guess the end of the fourth one. Things like that, I really love that they're kind of seeded earlier. Honestly, watching it this time, I actually also felt like in a way, the polyjuice potion scene didn't really give them that much more information. Like, I feel like if you could have had them sort of dismiss Malfoy as a possible suspect a little earlier, you could have almost done without that. But I like it because in the grand scheme of things, it's a really good setup for Mad-Eyed Moody and the kind of reveal with him at the end of the Goblet of Fire.
Yes.
So I like that because we know polyjuice potion exists. We just haven't, we didn't have it introduced in that particular story.
Right. You don't see it a lot. And so it's nice to have, anytime you get something that you've seen a little bit before, you can go, oh, that's what that is.
Mm-hmm. So everything has its purpose pretty much, right. Except for, I'm going to go back to my pet peeve, except for the Cornish pixies. They don't show up again. I just like picking on the pixies. I'm like, what is this doing here? And I know you made your defense. I'm just
in the movies, but they do in the book.
Right.
Is it Order of the Phoenix? Is that the one where they're in Sirius Black's house and they're trying to?
Yeah.
Yeah. The pixies keep interfering.
I think that's, everybody likes to talk about the Star Wars sequel trilogy and how this obviously wasn't planned out and all that other stuff. I feel like this is kind of a little bit, or in these early movies, I feel like maybe Chris Columbus and or J.K. Rowling were like, oh, we're going to leave this scene in because that's going to be important later. And then later it just wasn't important. That kind of thing. I feel like that's, yeah.
Yeah, where that might be a little bit easier with a book.
Right.
That's harder with a movie to try to decide, and go back and kind of fix that later.
Right. And as you mentioned, the books were ahead of the movies, but not by that much. Like they were only ahead by like a couple of stories. And it took a while for them to, by the time they got to the end of the movies, the books had come out like the year before or something. They were pretty on pace with each other almost, I feel like.
Yeah, they let's see, I wrote down here like the book for Goblet of Fire came out in 2000 and that movie was in 2005. And then Order of the Phoenix book came out in 2003 and the movie was in 2007. Yeah. And then they started getting a little bit closer together because Half-Blood Prince, the book, came out in 2005 and the movie was in 2009. So that's the same 4-year span between books at that point. And then the Deathly Hallows book came out in 2007, and those movies were in 2010 and 2011.
Yeah. I think
you're right.
Yeah. I think that's when she, obviously the last one, the last two, everything is payoff. It's like, we're going to take every little bit of all the previous 6 films, and we're going to bring Umbridge back, and we're going to bring the Centaurs back, and we're going to bring, whatever. Everything kind of has its Dobby and all these things that never may showed up again in the films, but are relevant in the book. That that story is nothing but main plot. There's no B plot to the last book. It's pretty much all the race for the Horcruxes, and I think that that's one of the rare instances where splitting it in half I think makes a lot of sense. I don't really necessarily think you needed that in Hunger Games or Twilight or all these other ones, but yeah, here I think it really there's a lot of story to pay off in that last couple stories there.
Absolutely. And plus, by the time you got to the movies for the Deathly Hallows, not only was there just all A plot, like you said, but in order for some of that to make sense, they had to go back and pick up a couple of things that they dropped out of these movies that then they needed for the story to make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So we get to kind of wanted to get into some of the stuff towards the end now. We get to the big reveal that Tom Marvolo Riddle is Lord Voldemort, and the fact that awfully convenient that it's an anagram for the name thing.
I know.
I don't know if I mean, it's like it's a movie thing. I'll buy it, but it's also like it's almost like he's like, I am Tom. I am Lord Voldemort. Like, how can I shuffle the letters of my name around to come up with my evil wizard name? But sure, whatever, dude.
There's a lot of other names that suffer from the entirely too appropriate, like we were saying earlier about Narcissa.
Yeah, exactly.
And Lupin,
Yeah. I love that one though.
He wasn't born a werewolf. He got bitten by one and turned into one. So, like, was he destined for that because you named him Lupin?
Yeah, exactly.
Like you said, and you just you can go, okay, that's cute, and let it go.
Right. The other thing too that struck me this time is that he had Tom Riddle's diary, blah, blah, blah. So none of the kids, I guess that they're trying to kind of sweep Voldemort under the rug, but it's like no one knew Voldemort's real name. I mean, I get that they didn't want to say Voldemort because it's like, he who must not be named, but it's not like a matter of historical record that Voldemort's name was Tom Riddle. I mean, I feel like that's something, I feel like we know Adolf Hitler's name. I feel like that would be something that would be in the wizard history books.
You would think. But I think part of it is that by the time he was Voldemort, there was hardly anybody left that knew who he was when he was younger. I mean, obviously Dumbledore did. We found that out later. But I don't know. I always wondered that too. It's like, why did no one know that was his name?
But then again, I mean, in Star Wars, I feel like, there's a big reveal in Star Wars Rebels that Ahsoka figures out, oh my gosh, Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker. So people kind of don't know that. That's not common knowledge either. So, I mean, I guess there's something to be said about that. And it does seem like the Ministry of Magic, at least later movies, really tries to pretend that put their head in the sand and be like, oh, he's not back. He's not a thing. Let's just, so it's easy. It could have just been kind of the adult wizarding world just trying to sweep Voldemort and or Tom Riddle under the rug as much as possible too.
Right. A little bit of the Harry Potter version of pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
You're right. Exactly.
Don't there. Don't look.
Yeah.
If we don't look, he's not there.
Yeah, exactly. I do love the idea of Tom Riddle's diary, though, and I think that's a really cool way to have Harry, who's sort of developing teenager and sort of realizing his own inner darkness, faced with literal teenage Voldemort and like his literal burgeoning dark, kind of almost a little bit older than Harry, but kind of in a similar state of figuring out who he is and what he's capable of. And I think that's a great way to really, as I said, kind of hit home the fact that these two are more similar than Harry Potter really wants to admit at that point.
That's a really good way to put that. Yeah.
I like the fact that the symmetry that in the first movie it's all Harry, Hermione, and Ron, sort of solving the puzzles and getting to Voldemort and or Quirrell. And in this one it's Harry and Ron, and then in the next one it's Harry and Hermione. So I like that Hermione sits this one out, so that in the next one Ron can sit that one out. And I think that's kind of a cool balance between the three main heroes and having them each kind of go on these final missions with Harry.
Yes. And in the Chamber of Secrets, you kind of needed that reason for Hermione to set it out, and her getting turned into a cat by accident was the reason we got for that one. Mm-hmm. So that where the polyjuice potion also helps out with that storyline.
Yeah.
Why the infirmary? Oh, and I remember thinking after the Quidditch scene in this one, why does Harry keep playing Quidditch? Because he always gets really hurt and winds up in the infirmary. You'd think that after a while he'd go like, maybe Quidditch is not the thing for me.
That's true. Well, he always catches the snitch, at least in these first two. So, I mean, worth it, I guess, is Harry's answer to that question.
I suppose. But, broken limbs or, no bones in this case. And, it's like after a while, you're just like, okay, find another hobby or another sport to play.
Well, are there any other wizard sports? Not in the movies, at least. I mean, I guess in the books there probably are, but...
I don't think they really make a big deal of other sports. It's just Quidditch.
Well, he also, I think he has a little bit of a thrill seeker in him, and clearly, as Dumbledore points out, is sort of a disregard for the rules as Voldemort and James Potter and a lot of the characters in these movies.
Yes.
You mentioned in the Chamber of Secrets, I do think that the practical effects of the basilisk hold up really well too. I think some of the CG shots are a little dodgy, but for the most part, I think it looks really well, especially when it's clear that it's a large scale puppet or some form. I think that's really cool, and it makes that sequence really exciting, I think.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that held up really well too. It doesn't, although that Harry's fighting something larger than he is, it doesn't look even as fake as the troll from the first one. So
right, exactly. I do think though, when in that final act, that like the journey to the Chamber of Secrets and the reveal that it was Ginny the whole time. I do feel like that is they could have developed that a little bit better, because we barely know who Ginny is in this movie. Like they don't really establish her as a character. I mean, we know she's Ron's sister, but beyond that, you know, she shows up at the beginning. She's clearly like all nervous to see Harry in her house when she's not like, you know, dressed up or whatever, because she has a crush on him. That much is obvious from the beginning of the movie. And she steps up to Malfoy's face when he's like getting all up on Harry and stuff. So we, you know, beyond that, we don't really know who the hell she is. So to have her be the character that we're like, oh my God, Ginny, it's like, I feel like they should have had, or maybe earlier in the movie before the Chamber of Secrets stuff really happens, just couple more scenes with Ginny, just kind of establishing the rapport of that group, because we never see any of them engage with Ginny. But it's tricky to do that because she's supposed to be under a trance most of the time. So it's like, maybe have her interact with the group while they're trying to solve the mystery, and then her getting all like scared and running off, and then having it later be revealed that, oh, that's because she was behind it or something. I don't know. I feel like there's ways that they could have handled that would have made that a little more satisfying.
I think that's a case of where they handled it better in the book. Mm-hmm. Because in the book, they didn't get their Hogwarts letters and have to go off to Diagon Alley the same day that Harry got to their house. Right. That was like halfway through the summer, and he spent weeks there in the house. And so he would have gotten to know Ginny at that point. And so that's because they shortened that in the movie to having all of that happen on the same day. You're right. Harry never got a chance to really even know who Ginny was, other than, you know, Ron's sister. Right.
Exactly. I think that's, you know, and that's something that they fix a little later in the stories. Ginny becomes a little more prominent as the stories go on and all of that. But yeah, that was just one thing that kind of struck me this time. Is there anything about Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets that we haven't mentioned that you wanted to make sure we talked about?
Let's see. I can look through my notes.
Really. I feel like we didn't mention Maggie Smith, and we need to mention Maggie Smith because she's great.
Oh,
in
absolutely.
General.
Yes, Maggie Smith is just awesome. I've loved everything I've ever seen her in. Yeah. And I was really, really happy when I found out that she was going to be playing McGonagall. Yeah, she wasn't in this movie as much as she is in other ones of them. McGonagall's just didn't get used a lot, but she's always brilliant no matter what she does.
McGonagall's also one of those characters that even if she's not in it a lot, she always gets like one or two decent sized scenes, and she always just kind of needs to be there. Like it wouldn't feel right if you watch a Harry Potter movie and McGonagall's not like in the crowd of people reacting to something. You know what I mean? Like she's such a mainstay. I feel like she's one of the, you know, there's maybe a half dozen actors that are in every single one of these movies, the you know, aside from the kids, I guess. And Maggie Smith is obviously one of them. I feel like she is so key to making the adult world of Harry Potter feel grounded, feel tangible, feel warm, but also stern. Like she's got that nice balance of being kind of like giving Harry the tough love that he needs, but also, you know, also cutting him some slack when she can tell that he's trying. And I think that, I think that she's a great character. And I think we needed, I wish we had more of her in these movies, but it's just, it's good that she's in there. I think Maggie Smith needs to be in everything is my point.
Yes, Maggie Smith in everything. I'll vote for that.
There you go. Maggie Smith in everything 2020. That would be a better choice for everyone.
Yeah. I think in the scene where Harry's got to go, the first time he has to go to Dumbledore's office when Fawkes winds up burning up. Mm-hmm. And she's sending it. She's like, oh, you got to go to Dumbledore's office. And Harry just assumes that he's in a world of trouble. Right. And McGonagall doesn't say anything. But as adults, we can kind of look at her face and go, there's something going on here, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
We're in so much trouble after all. And, but yeah, because he spends a whole lot of the movie being in trouble for things that he didn't do. So I'm sure he was just thinking, oh, no, not again. Especially when Fawkes burns up and then Dumbledore shows up and he's like, I didn't do it,
I swear. Every time I stand around, every time I'm just walking around minding my own business, I stumble upon crazy stuff.
That happens to me and I didn't touch it. Yeah.
All right, cool. So if we don't have anything else to say about this one, I like it a lot. I do feel like it's probably one of my lesser favorites of the franchise, but I mean, it's still really fun and it's still really watchable and I like it a lot. It's, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those franchises that it's like really hard for me to find a quote bad one. I think there are better ones, but I think that they're all pretty solid. And, even in a movie like this where it feels a little too long and it feels a little too indulgent in places, I think the cast has that natural rapport that they build that obviously feels more easy for them to jump back into in the second time around. And I think it's fun to just hang out with these characters and spend time in this world, even if it goes on a little bit more than it should, and that the editing's not quite as tight or whatever. Like, you can nitpick it all you want, but it's still Harry Potter and it's still fun to watch. So,
and the best part of it to me is that no matter which one of the movies that you sit down to watch, it always feels like you're sitting down to watch your friends.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I know who these people are. There was the same consistency in character between all of the movies. You don't get to one of them and go, well, why is he suddenly acting so different than he did in this other, movie?
Right. And there's a camaraderie and such an extensive supporting cast behind these three leads too, that shows up for the most part in every single film.
Yes.
Great.
And you can tell that the actors all like each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes a huge difference. Teri Sears, can you tell people where they can find you on social media?
Let's see. I'm on Twitter. I believe my ID is TN Sears. That's pretty much the really only other place I am besides Facebook.
Well, thank you so much for coming to talk about Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This was a really fun conversation, and it's a great franchise to just talk about in general. Like, I feel like we could have gone on for another hour just mentioning moments and like little references to things that would happen. We didn't even mention the Whomping Willow, for example, kind of shows up in this, has a more substantive role, I think, in the next one, actually.
Yes.
Things like that. So thank you for coming on and being a part of this series. And we'll definitely love to have you back on, talk about something else down the line.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I had a great time, and I'll come back anytime you want.
Awesome. Thank you, Teri. If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.